What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay, so now we have got Numbers chapter 10 lined up, and last chapter was they had the first anniversary, I guess you'd say, of the Passover, and then I guess the tabernacle was set up. I mean, a chapter or two before that had talked about the tabernacle being dedicated. So I guess then the cloud kind of settled on it, and because of the proximity to the second Passover, it just kind of included that in the chapter as well. Gave us a bit of a refresher on when the Israelites traveled through the wilderness and what guided them. And that brings us to chapter 10 here. So let's get rolling. Now the Lord said to Moses, "Make 2 trumpets of hammered silver for calling the community to assemble and for signaling the breaking of camp. When both trumpets are blown, everyone must gather before you at the entrance of the tabernacle. But if only one trumpet is blown, then only the leaders, the heads of the clans of Israel, must present themselves to you." Okay. Now, does it, was each trumpet for one of those specific purposes? Like, was there one trumpet specifically for, calling assembly, and another one specifically to signal breaking of camp? Or were there just 2 trumpets made because, if one, then only leaders, but if both, then everyone assembles? I don't know. Hebrew says tent of meeting at the tabernacle there. Just different translation based on the original Hebrew wording of the text. Anyway. Verse 5. When you sound the signal to move on, the tribes camped on the east side of the tabernacle must break camp and move forward. When you sound the signal a second time, the tribes camped on the south will follow. You must sound short blasts as the signal for moving on. But when you call the people to an assembly, blow the trumpets with a different signal. Only the priests, Aaron's descendants, are allowed to blow the trumpets. This is a permanent law for you to be observed from generation to generation. Okay, so I think that kind of answers my previous question. 2 trumpets were more so just because of the if only one, then just the leaders. If both trumpets, then everyone. But, so then the signal for breaking camp was supposed to be short trumpet blasts, and then something different, presumably longer, was, for calling an assembly. Okay, then verse 9. When you arrive in your own land and go to war against your enemies who attack you, sound the alarm with the trumpets. Then the Lord your God will remember you and rescue you from your enemies. Blow the trumpets in times of gladness, too, sounding them at your annual festivals and at the beginning of each month. And blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and peace offerings. The trumpets will remind your God of his covenant with you. I am the Lord your God. I mean, not that God necessarily needs another reminder of his covenant, because that's kind of part of what the offerings were for to begin with, especially some of the peace offerings and whatnot. But sometimes I think when it says, doing such and such a thing will remind the Lord of his covenant with you, or anything to that effect, it's more so just encouraging the people to follow up on that. It's almost like kind of telling them, hey, this is a sign of your commitment to communicating with God. Because, I mean, zooming out a bit and looking at, life today, there are other things that we are encouraged / commanded in some way to do that, while it may be presented or commanded as if, this is something that reminds God of such and such, or, this is for the sake of, following God's instructions and whatnot. A lot of those things are just as much for ourselves and like reaffirming our desire to, commune with the Lord. So it's not like God necessarily needs to audibly hear our prayers, for example, or even, have us specifically sit, kneel, whatever, and take time dedicated to praying for whatever is on our minds. God already knows our thoughts. However, we should still do it because it encourages, within us that desire to spend time sitting and communicating with God. It encourages us to, show our commitment to God. So, anyway, enough of that slight sidetrack, but it seemed relevant to this particular moment. So anyway, I think at this point I will move on to verse 11. In the second year after Israel's departure from Egypt, on the 20th day of the second month, the cloud lifted from the tabernacle of the covenant. So the Israelites set out from the wilderness of Sinai and traveled on from place to place until the cloud stopped in the wilderness of Paran. When the people set out for the first time, following the instructions the Lord had given through Moses, Judah's troops led the way. They marched behind their banner, and their leader was Nahshon, son of Amminadab. They were joined by the troops of the tribe of Issachar, led by Nethanel, son of Zuar, and the troops of the tribe of Zebulun, led by Eliab, son of Helon. Okay, so, it's official. The Israelites are finally leaving Sinai. After all these times that that it seemed like maybe they were going to, and I thought that maybe they were going to, now it's official. Footnote there, testimony instead of covenant. Footnote there, day occurred in April, May, or June. So that was what, 6 days after the possible month late Passover celebration. Because that was an issue that was just discussed in the last chapter. It was like, hey, we're unclean. We can't celebrate the Passover right now. Or can we? Because it's the Passover. It's really important. And God said, no, wait a month. You can still celebrate it. Just wait a month. So you'll actually be clean. So then they left from Sinai, went on to Paran, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It might be Paran. And then kind of as referenced with the trumpets sounding, so the first time the trumpets sounded, it was the tribes to the east of the tabernacle. I would assume, even though it didn't say it back here, that, so the first signal was tribes to the east, second signal was tribes to the south, and then next probably would have been west, and then north. And these, I assume, would have been the tribes that were to the east then. Okay. So then, verse 17. Then the tabernacle was taken down, and the Gershonite and Merarite divisions of the Levites were next in the line of marching, carrying the tabernacle with them. Reuben's troops went next, marching behind their banner. Their leader was Eleazar son of Shedeur. They were joined by the troops of the tribe of Simeon, led by Shelumiel son of Zurishaddai, and the troops of the tribe of Gad, led by Eliasaph son of Deuel. Next came the Kohathite division of the Levites, carrying the sacred objects from the tabernacle. Before they arrived at the next camp, the tabernacle would already be set up at its new location. Ephraim's troops went next, marching behind their banner. Their leader was Elishama, son of Ammihud. They were joined by the troops of the tribe of Manasseh, led by Gamaliel, son of Pedazur, and the troops of the tribe of Benjamin, led by Abidan, son of Gideoni. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3 that went there. Then it was basically the tribes responsible for the coverings and support structures. Those Levite tribes went next. And then it was Reuben's troops, and then tribe of Simeon and tribe of Gad. So we've got 3 other non-Levite tribes in this second group as well. And then, again, 3 non-Levite tribes in this group with the Kohathites. So, I recall when reading this, order of procedure at the beginning of Numbers, it kind of gave off the impression that it would be like, 2 sets of 3 tribes in front of the Levites, and then 2 sets of 3 tribes behind the Levites, which I guess is still a possibility. It's just the Levites were perhaps, well, first off, perhaps they were a bit more dispersed than that listing would have indicated, but also that it wasn't like, okay, all the Levites are going separately from any of the other tribes of Israel. They kind of went at a similar time to some of the others. But anyway, verse 25 is next. Dan's troops went last, marching behind their banner and serving as the rear guard for all the tribal camps. Their leader was Ahiezer, son of Ammishaddai. They were joined by the troops of the tribe of Asher, led by Pagiel, son of Okran, and the troops of the tribe of Naphtali, led by Ahira, son of Enan. This was the order in which the Israelites marched, division by division. Pretty self-explanatory there. So, yeah. Three tribes with some Levites that would have also involved the oxen and the wagons that were given. Another set of 3 tribes that would have gone along with the Kohathites, who had to carry, like, the stuff for the inner sanctuary on their shoulders. And then another group of 3 tribes behind all that. Verse 29. One day Moses said to his brother-in-law, Hobab, son of Ruel the Midianite, "We are on our way to the place the Lord promised us, for he said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will treat you well, for the Lord has promised wonderful blessings for Israel." But Hobab replied, "No, I will not go. I must return to my own land and family." "Please don't leave us," Moses pleaded. "You know the places in the wilderness where we should camp. Come be our guide. If you do, we'll share with you all the blessings the Lord gives us." Okay. But, like, weren't they kind of just going to camp out wherever the cloud stopped? I guess maybe knowing the nearby terrain would have been handy, though. And that's probably what Moses was talking about here. And maybe not even just the terrain, but also any other peoples that could possibly have been nearby. Because, again, massive amount of concern throughout this whole process in making sure that the tabernacle stays safe. Oh, speaking of the tabernacle, going back here in verse 21, it mentions, okay, before they arrived at the next camp, the tabernacle would already be set up at its new location. Before they arrived, would it mean specifically the Kohathites then? Because that was the most recent group of people mentioned before it says they. So maybe it means that, like, the other stuff for the tabernacle, like the coverings and the support structures, would already be set up. So then the Kohathites could just carry, the sacred furnishings and instruments directly into where it needed to go. That kind of makes some sense to me. It doesn't necessarily say that outright, but it's, I have no reason to believe that that's not how it would go. Anyway, okay, let's wrap this thing up. Starting in verse 33. They marched for 3 days after leaving the mountains of the Lord, with the ark of the Lord's covenant moving ahead of them to show where to stop and rest. As they moved on each day, the cloud of the Lord hovered over them. And whenever the ark set out, Moses would shout, "Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. Let them flee before you." And when the ark was set down, he would say, "Return, O Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel." So, we discussed the whole moving each day along with the cloud and whatnot. So they marched for 3 days. That kind of gives me the impression that it was, the cloud moved. They marched for a day. Cloud stopped. They kind of camped out for that day. Next day, cloud moved again. Like, it was 3 consecutive days of movement. Not necessarily that it was 3 continuous days and they marched for like 72 hours straight. That would be kind of absurd. Not saying it's impossible, but that would have been asking a lot right off the bat in their first trip away from Mount Sinai. So it still hasn't really given us a resolution on the situation with Hobab. Maybe we'll come back to that later. I don't know. But so when it comes to what Moses said, as they moved about and settled, the part about letting enemies be scattered was in some way, I kind of look at that as just sort of a wish for safe travels, because it would have complicated things so much more if they had gotten attacked while they were on the move. But then whenever they settled down and camped out for a little bit, that's when they would have potentially done any offerings or other things like that would have, that the presence of the Lord would have been desired directly with them instead of out scattering the enemies. But anyway, okay. I think I've pretty much said enough on that. So I think that's going to do it for Numbers chapter 10. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video and want others to see. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description to get info on their social media profiles and stuff like that. And leave comments below there with any thoughts you have, whether it's related to, this chapter specifically, other Bible questions, other video ideas, whatever you have for me. Let me know down below. So that's going to do it for this one. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.